Let's start there. You went to Albuquerque at 13, and what happened? What middle school did they send you to?
I ended up going to Wilson, which is nowadays, now that they've completely bastardized where the uh, war zone neighborhood is. The area where Wilson is now is considered a war zone, even though it's not a war zone. Just because a neighbor gets shitty doesn't make it the war zone. The war zone is a specific neighborhood. And Van Buren was actually the worst middle school, and that was over on Louisiana. And that was where all the kids from the war zone went to for middle school.
That's where I went.
You went to Van Buren?
They bused me from Four Hills to Van Buren.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, because they also had a bunch of kids from base
Yep,
going to Van Buren,
yep,
and
yep,
then they mixed them all up with all these kids from the fucking war zone.
yep. Yeah, I'm still shocked I survived, and I'm so relieved it wasn't nearly as bad as they said it was gonna be. They're like, "You're gonna get to Van Buren, the cholos gonna stuff you in the trash cans," and it was better than I
Yeah, well, I mean,
had
yeah,
expected it to be.
I heard all those scary stories, coming from Europe and my first time back in American school since the fourth grade. And yeah, we were scared shitless and stuff, and so I showed up and had to like do my strut and make sure nobody fucked with me. Uh, and then you realize these are sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, man. They're 11, 12, and 13. You know, how bad are they going to hurt you? Well, except for this Albuquerque, so it's not too unusual for a 13-year-old to murder somebody at school. But
No, or at least stab you with something. Was Wilson
yeah,
like that for
yeah.
you? I mean, some people talk about
Well,
literally getting jumped in at Wilson.
no, there's a little bit of problems, but basically we just ran amok at the school. And I don't remember any fights. We had a large Vietnamese population there because at that time, 80, 81, 82, 83, we had a lot of the Vietnamese refugees, and they were
Yeah.
set up in my neighborhood over at Carlisle and Gibson, and then the projects down at Yale and uh, Cesar Chavez. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually Santa Clara goes next to the projects behind the 7-Eleven there. Those were
Yep.
built for the Vietnamese
Oh,
refugees,
okay. Okay.
and um, and I almost got into a fight with those guys once because I was a soccer player, and they were out there kicking the ball around, and I had just come from Europe, where it didn't matter who you are or where you were in Europe. If kids are kicking a soccer ball around, anybody's invited, and everybody comes in and joins in. And that's just the way that things are over there. And so, these Vietnamese kids are kicking the ball around. So I go over and jump in and start playing with them and get the ball from them. And then it turned into like a game of keep away. And then like all of a sudden, out of the blue, some kid comes up behind me and just kicks me in the ass. And I was like, dude, what the fuck? So I picked the ball up and turned around. I was gonna get in his face, and all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by like 30 Vietnamese kids, and none of my friends were anywhere. They all just split. I was just like looking around. I was like, the fuck? So I just took the ball and handed it to the guy and walked away and never tried being friends with him again.
No, we're good. Who was
But
your friends at Wilson?
huh?
Who were your friends at Wilson?
The ones that carried over to Highland, like some people knew them. There's like Luke Addington. I think he died. Robbie Dunn, he did die. Who else was there? Paul Carroll, he died. These were all like freak types. None of us had like really gotten into punk rock yet.
Okay.
And and then Steve Rail, who is still one of my closest friends, we met in eighth grade at Wilson, and he also got into punk rock. We didn't get into punk rock till around late ninth grade sort of era. Maybe it was during ninth grade, but it was like 81, 82. KUNM used to have a punk rock radio show. The DJ on it was Gordy Anderson. Gordy Anderson, he played guitar for
Jerry's
Jerry's Kids.
kids.
He
Okay.
also played guitar for Cracks in the Sidewalk. and I'm still friends with him. He had a stroke, and so if this part makes the cut, um, anybody who hears this, get a hold of Gordy because he needs friends to talk to him, come by and see him and shit. But anyway, so yeah, I started listening to his radio show, and that's how I got into it. Because like I had actually gotten into punk rock, into listening to it when I was in England, because I was like 77, 78, and so that's when like the
Yeah.
Sex Pistols,
Well, that's cool.
Clash were all huge and shit. And so I remember seeing the Clash on Top of the Pops and shit. First time I saw the video for London Calling was when I was a little kid in England. Like I delivered papers, and so I even delivered that newspaper. Sid Vicious died. Sid Vicious murders his girlfriend. I delivered those papers, the ones they made a news T-shirt out of. Did you
Yeah,
ever see
that's an
those?
interesting perspective. I have seen
Yeah.
those.
Well, it was funny because I remember reading, because I'd always read the cover of the paper when I was
Yeah.
out delivering them, because we had to walk on foot and deliver them by hand into mailboxes in the doors. Not like the fucking lazy ass kids here in the U.S. that
Yeah, I
could
was
ride
gonna
their
say
bike
not
and
like
just throw it
America.
in the yard.
No.
Yeah, no, so we had a lot of time just walking around the neighborhoods before school at like 5 in the morning. Um, but yeah, and so I read that, and it's like the one for the day that Sid Vicious died. I remember it saying, having a quote that said, his mom said, "I'm glad the bastard's dead."
Damn.
Yeah, and so I'd gotten introduced, and then on the radio we had like Elvis Costello and what's his face, the bald gay dude, Joe Jackson. That was when Joe Jackson stuff was still good and edgy. Like, is she really going out with him and stuff like that? And Boomtown Rats, those are still one of my favorite bands. And so yeah, all that stuff was on the radio. So I heard it, but I didn't really know too much about it. And come back to the States and listening to Gordy's show, that's like where I first heard Descendants and a whole bunch of other bands that led me to uh, find out about like where the record stores were and going down to the student ghetto. And I used to hang out with this kid named Scooter, who was about half my size and had red hair and a full beard at 13. Did you ever know Scooter?
I didn't.
Steve May?
I didn't.
But yeah, and so we looked real goofy together. Having this big old oafish guy and fucking little tiny fucking leprechaun looking dude. And we'd ride our skateboards down. We were up at the top of the Ridgecrest neighborhood at Carlisle and Gibson, and we just ride our boards downhill and get to the student ghetto. And back then, the student ghetto was still had a heavy hippie influence from the 70s, and then
Yes.
the punk rock influence was taking over. So there's this clash. Not really a clash, but just like I saw a little bit of violence there, but not really.
That's just interesting to me. I'm sure there was a transition at some point.
Yeah, yeah, and well, the
Oh,
main thing
boy.
that caused the full-on transition is when UNM cut down the trees at Yale Park. But by that point, a lot of the hippies had moved on. But like, there was this dude named Chris, the cigarette guy, and he had a full-on like two 8 foot long tables right on Central at Harvard, where he sold cigarettes. And cigarettes are just laid out across his 16 feet of tables. And that's where we'd buy our Clove cigarettes and shit like that. And then right behind him, right there, was Budget Tapes and Records. And I never liked their selection, and the people who worked in there were sort of dicks. But down about half a block up was Natural Sound, and the dude who owned that place was fucking badass. He was great. And he would always like, as soon as we walked in, he'd say, "Hey guys, I got a new shipment in." Rush over to the punk rock section, and yeah, and then there were all the restaurants through there. There was a place called Purple Hippo that went back to the hippie days. It went back to the '60s, and they'd built benches around the tree out in front of their cafe, and it was on Harvard. On the east side of Harvard, about halfway up, is where Purple Hippo was. And across the street from there, there are these new dudes who moved in. That was when, like, the Uppies tried taking over the student ghetto. And they had a shop called Two Wheel Drive. And that's where I bought my first mountain bike from. But in the middle of the night one night, they went over and cut down that tree and cut down those benches because they were sick of having hippies hang out. They wanted to like get rid of that aspect of the neighborhood. So they cut down those public benches that they had built. And shortly after that, the Purple Hippo guys were like, "Yeah, fuck these people," and they moved on.
Yeah.
And then there's a pizza place right at the corner of Harvard and Central called Appetitos, which is just garbage pizza. But I mean, like it was like 75 cents a slice or something. So after we spent all of our money on punk rock records, we'd at least have a little bit of change for some pizza. Pizza City was right next to Natural Sound, and if the people who own Mario's were the kids of the owners of Pizza City,
Really?
and pizza, yeah, and Pizza City was just great. I got in real tight with the owners there for about 4 or 5 years. You look like you fell.
No, I'm okay. I'm on a bouncy chair.
Yeah, and I even went to work for the kids at Mario's around the time they first opened. And after they closed Pizza City, Mario, who's the father, and Anne, who is their mother, they came over to work, and so they like showed me all this Italian crap, and so I got to say that I learned my Italian food from a little old Italian lady. Well, except she's a Sicilian, and Sicilian food's different than Italian, but we won't get into that. And so, like, you could that in those days, you could walk Harvard from Silver to Central and get offered just about any drug that was available, and uh, and that's what made that area fun. And then the next block over, you had Cornell, and back in those days, Saggio's was called Zanios. Or not Zanios. The fuck were they called? The fuck was Saggio's called before it was Saggio's?
I don't commit those things to memory. That's what I have you guys for.
Oh, jeez. I can't believe I can't
Are you still
remember that.
talking early 80s? So like before
Zanios
they
was
cut down the
another.
trees?
Well, it was during that same time, and then and they ended up opening pizza shops all over town, and then they had this like crazy ass fast food personal pizza thing. It was built like in a glass contraption, and the kitchen was like up above the drive-through, and they dropped the pizzas down a fucking chute, and they'd come down to the person where, what the fuck was their name? I can't believe I can't remember their name. Nunzio's.
None. Okay. Oh, that's right,
Yeah,
because
Nunzio's.
Nunzio's was just one little place, and then there was two or three later on.
Yeah, it was just one little hole in the wall, and back then their pizza was just phenomenal.
It was really
But the
good.
place was really way too small for the amount of business that they were getting. And like on a Friday night, there'd be 20 people, 20-person line going down the street outside the door just to pick up pizzas. And back then, also, you couldn't buy beer on Sunday. And so that was one of our Sunday beer haunts. And we'd go in there and take over like a whole set of like 4 booths and get one person with a fake ID, and they'd like go up and buy like 10 pitchers and bring back over. And the manager would come around like, "Oh no, we're not drinking it. People over there with IDs are drinking it. It's not And so and there was a lot of magic in that neighborhood back then, just because of the sort of level of lawlessness that there was since the hippie days. And you can get on Albuquerque history pages, and there'll be videos of the hippie riots in the student ghetto in the 70s. There were hippie riots, and then the American Indian movement had riots. They were shutting down bars. They shut down the bar where the 7-Eleven is at Central and University. That used to be a bar. I forget the name of it, but one of the owners was a guy who owns Lobo Men's Shop, and one of the owners was a guy who owns quarters, and there was a third owner. I forget who it was.
It was the Okie Joe's.
Okies,
Uh,
yeah, Okie Joe's,
Okie
yeah,
Joe's. Mm-hmm.
yeah, because
Because
Lobo
there
Men's
was a
shops, well, Lobo Men's shop still kept selling shirts for Okie Joe's,
okay. Okie
but
Joe's
yeah,
had like a
American,
civil rights protest in the 60s.
that was probably the American Indian movement,
Mm-hmm.
and they ended up just burning the bar down for serving Native Americans. And when they did that, they ended up renting the property to 7-Eleven. And like the last I heard, I had a bunch of friends who worked at Quarters, and the last I heard from them, this is all anecdotal, but uh, their story back in like the 90s was that those guys were getting like 40 grand a month in rent from 7-Eleven. So they could have just retired just off the rent on that corner property. Um, and but the neighborhoods, the main neighborhood of the student ghetto that runs from Yale up to Girard, um, that's like the heart of the student ghetto. And south of Yale, it's sort of ghetto-ishy, but then you start getting into nicer houses. But the main heart is south of Central and from Yale to Girard over to the graveyard. And back then, they could just throw a street party just for the sake of throwing it. They didn't need shit from the city. They didn't need security. They'd just go off and steal some barricades from another part of the city, and then that Saturday morning put up barricades and
Just
set up a
have
stage in the street. And yeah, there it was. And you used to be able on Fridays and Saturdays just walk up and down the streets and just any house that was having a party, it was an open door. Sometimes they didn't want you in. Sometimes they didn't want you in there, and you found out real quick. And so
yeah.
you'd be like, okay, fine, we'll go to the next party, next house down. There ain't no cute girls here, anyways. And yeah, and that's how the student ghetto was back then. It was dirt cheap to live there too. I mean, fuck. My apartment on Columbia, the apartment that like so many people know me from at Columbia and Central, that
Mm-hmm.
place cost 185 a month for a one bedroom. And we had three
Wow.
people living. We had three people living in there. I was in the bedroom. Dude, Chris was in the living room, and dude, Dave Ewan lived in the kitchen on a couch in the
They
back.
lived in the kitchen.
Yeah, we paid 185, and we had a house down before I moved into that place. We had a house down on the north side of downtown in Wells Park at 7th and Mountain, and this was a two-story, four-bedroom house with two living rooms, a fireplace, a two-car garage, a dog yard, parking for 10 cars, and that place cost us 575 a month. And I think at the peak, we had like 8 people living there.
What year was that? Just as a
That
guess.
was like 87 to 89, I think. Because it was when I was living there that I met Bill Stevenson from Descendants and Black Flag. Because he was friends with one of my roommates, who well, he wasn't really friends with him, he knew him, but one of my roommates tried out for Descendants, and then Bill's girlfriend for about 10 years or so, Serena, she was living back in Albuquerque after they broke her out of rehab, and so while he lived in Albuquerque for the summer, while he's hanging out with Serena, uh, and he didn't like Ian, and so me and him just started hanging out together all the time. And I didn't work back then. Yeah, we made our money off of. I hope the statute of limitations is up. Uh, we made our money off of New York Times machines. We could get $60 in quarters out of a single New York Times machine,
And they were everywhere.
and they were everywhere. Yeah,
That was your
and
thing.
yeah, and then we were notorious for raiding freezers at parties, and the next day we'd have a big old barbecue with whatever we fucking stole out of the freezer at the party the night before. And
These are
yeah,
the
we were
year
just being,
these are the years after graduation. Did you graduate from Highland?
yeah, I graduated. I actually graduated early because I hated the place so much, so I just wanted to get away.
And what
I didn't
years were
hate.
those?
My graduation year was '86.
Okay.
Even
Okay.
though I finished in the winter of '85, they still they don't let you like actually graduate on your own in mid semester. You have to wait till the end of the year. And so by the end of the year, it was like 6 months later. I was like, dude, I went to the parties and shit, the graduation parties, but I didn't go to the commencements. But my two sisters graduated from Highland, and so I was the third AG in a row that they mispronounced our name. And yeah, we're in the pit and shit, and we're laughing the first two times it happened to my sisters, and then I didn't go to commencements, but then everyone told me afterwards, they're like, yeah, you called your name out. They even waited for you to come up, and they called your name out again, and they got it wrong. I was like, of course they got it wrong. What the fuck?
Yes, they did. So this is why you were raising hell 86, 87, 88. I'm assuming you were
Yeah,
raising
I
hell.
mean, and part of that time that was when I was delivering pizzas at fucking Knob Hill Pizza Place, which only added to my ability to be a complete jack off. I mean, I was making $40 a night in tips, and then they paid delivery drivers full minimum wage, unlike waiters and waitresses. And so every 2 weeks I got a full paycheck and pay the bills with that. And then every night that I worked, like the first $10, I'd run over to my buddy Chris's house and pick up a gram of pot. The next $10, I'd run by quarters because I had a fake ID back then, like everybody, and pick up a 12 pack. And that was before dinner rush had even started. And then I'd do dinner rush and shit, and make another $20 or so, and have enough money for like lunch the next day and shit. But I mean, fuck, we fucking ate so much goddamn pizza back then. Uh, the amount of cheese you didn't need to eat for breakfast and lunch the next day because you had this big old lump of cheese trying to make its way through your
That's
intestines.
funny. So that was the year you graduated, or did you work there while you're still in school?
No, I worked at the East Central Pizza when I graduated.
Okay,
That
and
was
then
one up
pizza.
at San Mateo in Central. You could work at 15 back then, but you could only work certain hours and you had to have a signed thing from your parents and shit. And so
Yeah, they
like you
wouldn't
had
let
to
me
be on.
deliver pizzas. I thought I
Yeah,
was going to answer the phones.
yeah, you couldn't deliver until you were 18. They actually tried to
What's
get me
that?
to go into management, and I was like, dude, why do I want to go into management? Make less money? You have to fucking worry about this shit? I'm having fucking time of my life right now. You see how many empty Pepsi cans are in the front seat of my car? I didn't pay for a single one of those.
So in that time, were you just drinking and smoking pot and delivering pizzas? This is no horrible years of drug
And
addiction or any going to jail or anything bad
no,
for you?
no, the drug addiction thing came a little bit later. And I was never really a drug addict. I was a heavy drinker, but and there we are. So, oh Jesus Christ, what the fuck is all over my shirt? I haven't changed my shirt since Friday, so got a couple.
Well, nice of you to get dressed up.
Yeah, well, I had to make sure my hair was done right.
Yeah. Fix your makeup.
Yeah, so around that period, that was like 80, 87, 88, 89. Yeah, we were just drinking and smoking a lot of pot. We'd have parties every weekend. People from over the city came down to that Wells Park neighborhood. Back then, the Wells Park locals really didn't like a lot of white people in their neighborhood. They didn't want any white people in their neighborhood. We used to get into fights with them out in the street. And even the cops would show up and they'd be on the local neighbor's side. And one of the cops one day said, "Hey, man, we don't want your type down here. Get the fuck out of here. We rent the house here, man. We can rent a house anywhere we fucking want." And I got arrested so many times at that house that I actually kept $100 bill in my drawer, in my dresser drawer in my bedroom, that all my roommates knew where it was,
Come get
so
you.
that to come get me out of jail. Yeah, it was at least 10 times. I got arrested like 15 times between 80 when I turned 18 in '86, between '86 and '91 when I got arrested, or 1990 when I got beat up by the cops. And then after that, I only got arrested like two more times, both for DWI. Or no, I got arrested another time for failure to appear on a citation for my dog from animal control.
But no actual jail time. These charges
Um,
are as
no,
an
because
adult.
almost everything that I got arrested for was like refusal to obey or drinking in public. And I remember I asked my lawyer. My lawyer is a pretty famous politician in New Mexico, Tom Rutherford, and he just died recently, and there was a big memorial for him. And he was probably one of the best things that New Mexico ever had when it came to politics. But he was my lawyer back then because for a while his son was my roommate during that period. But yeah, and so his son was driving his car, and he's got this big old like Ford LTD with the red and yellow government plates on it. And the cops would show up to the yard and see the government plates on him, and it'd say state senator because it showed like what it was back then. And the cops are like, "Oh shit, what are we getting ourselves into?" But so they'd arrest me for like refusal to obey, drinking in public. Uh, they try to do shit like assault on a police officer was it's a high court misdemeanor, so it's sort of harder for them to just throw you in jail for that because then they have to go back and do other stuff afterwards in court. But if they just get you for refusal to obey, they can just throw you in jail and forget about you. Forget they even wrote the citation.
They don't have to
And
do
the
any more
drinking,
work.
yeah, well, the drinking in public, I found out from my lawyer because I was like, dude, how could I be drinking in public when they arrested me on the property that I was renting? And he said, well, the in Albuquerque, the citation for drinking in public actually goes back to when the white people started moving into Albuquerque after the war for Sandia Labs. And they didn't, it was, customary for the Hispanic population in the afternoons after work when they get home from work. They open up all their double hung windows to let the house cool down, and then they sit on their porch and they drink beers until the house cools down, then they go in and have dinner. Well, the white people didn't like seeing the Mexicans sitting on their porch drinking beer, so they came up with this law, drinking in public, which meant that if somebody could see you from a public space, then you were drinking in public. So even if you were sitting in your living room and they could see through the window, that would be considered drinking in public. That was one of the white people laws that came along. And there's a bunch of them. I don't think about them too much anymore, but those were the stuff that was the stuff that I got arrested for. And then during that time also, that's when we all got pretty well uh, into LSD, and
Okay.
and those were actually some really good times when we were on the LSD. And even then, like around '88, we could go to Harvard, to what's called the Harvard Mall now, and just walk up and down the street and ask people if they got any help. And somebody eventually would say, "Yeah, that dude over there has some," but nobody'd be like, "Oh my God, dude, you must be a narc. You shouldn't be, you should be
No,
using code words and shit."
it's
You
before
just go
that.
walk down or go over to Yale Park. Hey man, anybody here got any Yale? Somebody'd pull out a quarter sheet and like rip a couple pieces off, and they were tripping balls because the shit absorbs through your fingers. And so every time they pulled some out to tear some off, and I had this bad habit. A single hit back then would cost you $5.
Mm-hmm.
Quarter sheet of 25 hits would cost you $25. So I was like, well, fuck it, man, I got the money. I'll just buy the quarter sheet and then sell a bunch and make my money back and give some away and stuff. And it never really worked out that way. I ended up doing a whole bunch and giving the rest away.
That was my next question. Did you actually sell it or did you just take it all?
I've never been good at selling shit, but yeah, and so it was common for me to do like 3 hits of LSD at a time, and uh, and so those were really good times when we were all tripping balls. It wasn't really super hardcore. I mean, you didn't like see like tigers flying across the sky and shit like that. It was just I don't know, it's sort of weird to explain. It was just sort of a high. In 1990, I got beat up by the cops.
Really? Like, really?
Like really beat up. I ended up having to get my left nut cut off
Oh my
because
God.
they cracked it open. I had two cops holding me down with each arm face down, and then a third cop behind me with his flashlight smashing me between the legs. And instead of going to jail, I went straight to the hospital. And then from the hospital, after that, I had to go to jail. So I was like, I spent 12 hours in the hospital in police custody. And I was like, dude, just send me to jail. I would have been home by now. And then I could have gone to the hospital. Like, oh, no, you said we hurt you, so we have to take you to the hospital. And so it was known, especially by myself, that I was going to win a lawsuit from the city. And in 1991, I ended up winning the lawsuit. Wasn't it? No, it was 90. But leading up to that, I was still friends with Darren Duffy. Did you ever know Darren Duffy?
I did. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
And we're
friends with
talking
Darren
the
Duffy.
90s.
Yeah, well, this was around 89, 90. It was around 90 or 91. Well, we were friends in high school, and then, after high school and the whole party scene after high school. Um, and that's one of the things that is funny is that whole party, because we had our place down in Wells Park, north downtown. Um, and Darren, his dad owned a bunch of properties in the student ghetto, and they had four properties at Cole and Yale, right next to
And
the
then
Smiths.
the one ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they had all these people living in there, Chris Partain and Darren. I think Jeff lived in there for a little bit. The Romero brothers, Dan and Steve Romero, they lived there. And so that was like a whole nother party area. And I remember somebody telling me back during that time that they'd read this study thing in like Newsweek or People or some shit ass magazine. And that said that, like, when you're 18, you have X amount of friends. And as you get older, that X amount of friends consistently dwindles down to where after like a decade, you only have a few friends left. And that always stuck with me because during that time, in that period after high school for about 5 or 6 years, there were like 250, 300 of us. That we could just like at any random, like you run
Yeah.
into them at the store or on the street, like, oh, hey, what are you doing? We're having a party over there. And then just slowly over time, people grew up or they fell out of the scene or they moved away. And then next thing you know, after a couple of years, there's only like 100 of you left, and that's why one of the things I do like about Facebook is that like even though everyone moved apart, we can still like talk to each other, even though it's not like talking about going to a party or something. Like you
Something.
said, the people, your little phrase, the people who survived, a lot of them, got smart about it and they don't, drink constantly and shit. And I'm one of the
Uh,
last ones to do that, I think. But yeah, so me and Darren had started talking about opening a junkyard together,
mhm.
and we were real into it. And he had money from his dad, and I was getting money from the police settlement, and we had the whole plan set up. How we were going to do it. And then about 6 months before I got my settlement, I found out that Darren and Mike Brock opened a junkyard. And I was sort of pissed, and so I talked to Darren. He's like, "Well, I got sick of waiting for you, and the opportunity came up when we got the property." And I was like, "Okay, fine, fuck you, whatever." And so I never went down to parties at the junkyard, and that was in the early '90s. Um, because there's actually a lot of money to be made off junk cars, and I was like thinking, dude, my early 20s, what could be funner than to have your own junkyard where you can just fucking drink all day and take a sledgehammer out to the yard and smash cars and
You're
shit.
funny.
Fucking, oh yeah, nothing more fun than having your own junkyard. And that all got taken from me. But then they ended up. It was that crowd that ended up getting heavy into heroin. Um,
Yes. So
and,
you dodged a
and
bullet there?
yeah, yeah. Well, I never would have gotten into it. It would have just gotten ugly if me and Darren went into business together because it's just not uh, not how I work. And so we would have had to split up as a business if he wanted to keep doing shit like that. Because I had thrown people out of my house, roommates out of my house for doing coke in the house.
Well, I grew up
And
with
so yeah,
Darren. I've thrown him out of my house.
yeah, he did sort of have a bratty side to him.
Uh, yeah, if there was trouble, he could find it. He, I mean, he was
But yeah,
really
and
good
so
at
and
finding
that
it.
yeah, and that's where all those guys went off the deep end. And for the
Things
next
in the
20 years
90s.
after that period, yeah, for the next 20 years after that period, all of them were fighting that. That's
Yeah.
what Jeff was fighting. I'd been working on a union dock, on a Teamster dock since 1990, and that's when I got into union politics and organizing, and then that's when I started to learn about labor history. And I tried organizing all the beer drivers in Albuquerque. I did end up getting the first card signers at Levi Strauss. Levi used to have a factory in Albuquerque,
Hmm.
and something happened, and the Teamsters lost that factory to the ACTU, Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union. Um, and I got into a spat with the guys at the Teamster local about losing that, and then I still got a good name over there. If you go in there, like the people who run the place now are people I worked with back in the day. And if you bring at the Teamster local, if you bring up my name, they're happy to hear it. They want to know what I'm doing and how everything's going.
Good
But
for you.
during that period, got pissed off that we lost the Levi factory. They're like, well, they knit clothes there. Of course, it's going to go to the clothing and textile workers. Like, dude, there's 5 fucking Levi factories within 300 miles of us that are all Teamster. No, oh well, I'm like yeah, well, whatever. But yeah, so that was like part of me doing the grown up thing, and then after that, around the time I turned 26, I got fired from one of my jobs, and I was like, okay, fine, fuck it. I got fired from my job at Noble Cisco, actually delivering groceries to restaurants, and that's when I decided to go to culinary school, and that sort of like changed my whole direction. But going back to like the old days, um, and like the student ghetto and shit, and the sort of lawlessness of Albuquerque. Um, I mean, we used to have shows at motels. Um, the
Motels on Central.
desert, yeah, yeah, the desert. What the fuck is the name of the place? There was one motel right off of Central and San Mateo, behind the Octopussy. I mean, the
Hmm.
Octopus car wash. There's an Octopus car wash there, and then behind that, I think it's called the Desert Sands. But then that show got canceled at the last minute and got moved to the Firefighters Hall, which is down by Roosevelt Park. But that Desert Sands motel, that was where they filmed the ending of um, that one Coen Brothers movie about the dude that just goes around assassinating people. No Country for Old Men.
Wow.
They filmed the end of that at the Desert Sands, and that was the last thing they ever did there. They tore the place down like 2 weeks later because I think the place was scheduled to be torn down anyways. But then when the movie crew came in, they're like, "Okay, no, just hold off on tearing it down. Let's do our filming, then you can tear it down." So if you want to get some like final mem- memory type shit about Albuquerque, you can watch No Country for Old Men
Okay. I'll
and like
put that on the
that.
list.
Yeah, it's not the very last scene, but it's like the second to last scene. I think the very last scene they end up in like Lubbock or Abilene. That's what it looks like just from the streets.
Hmm.
Everything's just all flat, square, and just. Ugh. But um, yeah. So I forgot where I was.
Shows. Shows on Central, shows in the ghetto,
Yeah, it
shows at
shows. Yeah,
houses. Tell me about some
Yeah, and like
shows.
the first show I tried going to, that was the second show I tried going to, and I couldn't find the fucking place, and found out that it moved, and I was on foot back then because I was 14 years old, and so now I'm at Central and San Mateo, and they're like, oh yeah, you got to go down to Roosevelt Park.
No.
Like, oh yeah, I want to walk 4 miles across town, fuck,
Yeah, that's
across
like
the south. Yeah, it probably wasn't that far, but it's somewhat close. And then the second show that I wanted to go to, but same thing. Channel 3 played at a place called Dennis Chavez Community Center, which is in the heart of East San Jose, South Broadway area. And white boys didn't walk in. Yeah, well, having the punk show was, it was weird enough, and there's some crazy shit. But most of the people who went to the punk show drove there, and so they could drive through the neighborhood being somewhat safe. The little tiny 14-year-old white boy did not walk
yeah,
through that
no.
neighborhood at night.
Oh no.
Period. And that was even back when we still had the footbridge that went over I-25 to get down where you could go from like Milne Stadium area
Hmm.
over into
Oh
East
yeah.
San Jose.
Okay.
Yeah, and they tore that down because the white people thought that all the brown people were coming up from East San Jose to rip them off. And they're like, oh
I
no, like
forgot
we.
about that bridge.
yeah, they fucking tore that down. That's the one thing that Albuquerque was always good about was tearing shit down, like not giving a shit about its past,
Mm-mm.
not at all. But yeah, and so that was the second show and I heard stories about that show for decades. Just how epic it was. There's Channel 3 from LA, and you know I saw them a couple of years back in Portland, and we got to be friends and shit, and because I saw them a couple of times more in Albuquerque, and they're like really tight with their fans nowadays. They're
Hmm.
super cool dudes. And they're like way better now than they were back then, which is weird to
When you
say
were
about dudes in
14.
their 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, their musical talent has evolved.
yeah. But I mean, it's still punk rock, but yeah. And so after that, uh, the next summer is the summer of '83. They started doing what were called the community center shows. And we had a whole lineup all summer long of shows at different community centers. But none of them were at Dennis Chavez in fucking East San Jose. But they were up in the war zone or in the fairgrounds neighborhood. Well, nowadays, everyone in Albuquerque calls everything like in that area the war zone. I guess it's gotten that bad over there.
I think of the war zone as being that area by the fairgrounds plus the one across the street towards Van Buren. To me, those two are the war zone, but I could see where you could draw a line because there's a
Well,
big
no,
difference on north side of Central
te-
versus south side.
technically, the war zone is only the Trumbull Community Center neighborhood.
Really, the housing
The
that was built.
area, it's that area where Van Buren was. That's the Trumbull Community Center neighborhood right there. That
Mhm.
area that is southeast of Zuni in Louisiana. That is the war zone. With Chama and Dallas and all those streets through there.
Yep.
If you cross Louisiana going to the west, it's a shitty neighborhood, but it's not the war zone. If you cross Zuni and you're still a half mile to Central, not the war zone anymore, but you're in a shitty neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you cross Central at Louisiana. That's Fairgrounds neighborhood, and yeah, it's a shitty fucking neighborhood. You don't want to be walking around there no matter who you are at night. And I'm sure it's worse now, but it's not the war zone.
It's not the war
People
zone.
in Albuquerque just decided that if it's bad, it's a war zone. But no, technically, the war zone is only the Trumbull Community Center neighborhood.
The Van
And
Buren area.
yeah, where Van Buren Middle School is, even
Is
though
that
Van Buren Middle
because
School.
is that because the housing there was the post-war housing that they built to live in for.
No, that post-war housing that was built there was built for employees who worked on the base, civilian
Hmm.
employees.
Hmm.
It wasn't built for to be like a ghetto area.
Well, that's what I wonder is when did it change when they moved them all on base?
No, when people who worked on base started making better money and they started living in better parts of town, and so that area there got neglected, and it just turned into an area where it had really cheap rent and poor people moved into. One of the things that caused the big problem in the late 80s was when California created their three strikes rule. And people don't talk about this, and I don't know why nobody talks about this. It's like nobody even realized it. But when California came out with the three strikes rule, as soon as a felon got two strikes, they left California
They left the state.
because they didn't want to take the chance of getting a third strike in California. So they went to Las Vegas, they went to Phoenix, they went to Albuquerque, they went to Denver, and the crime rates in those cities went up amazingly because of California's three strikes rule. California finally brought that back or got rid of that, or at least part of it, I guess. But yeah, all that California's three strikes rule did was ruin it for the states that surround it.
I hadn't thought about that because there was a point that there was such a change, and I've been trying to figure out what that point was. I hadn't considered that. Thank you very much. Because,
Yeah, that it was around '88, and that's when
yeah, the
it
gangs
because
started.
that was when I was delivering pizzas for from the Nob Hill store, and we had that neighborhood, and the fucking managers at Nob Hill always saved the war zone orders for me to deliver. And there was another neighborhood in that area that was all black, and it was called the Sticks. But it's actually called the Sticks was the name of it, but it was called Kirtland Park. And if you
By the
drive
airport.
all the way to huh?
By the airport.
Yeah, all the way to the end of University, and then University dead ends in this neighborhood.
Yeah,
It's like at least back then it was like a 90% black neighborhood,
yeah.
and they wouldn't send any of the female drivers into that neighborhood, and they would save pizzas going there for me. And I remember I went to this one place one night, and I'd gone to these guys' house like I don't know 5 or 10 times, and they're cool as shit. They're just sitting around smoking beer and drinking pot, and and I bring the pizza in. They start counting their money out, and one guy goes, "Hey man, how come you're the only pizza delivery driver we see over here?" I was like, well, because the place I work for is afraid to send anybody else. They think you guys are gonna kill us all. And they just start fucking rolling over laughing.
They think
It
that's
was funny.
Kirktown. It's the Kirktown
Yeah, yeah,
neighborhood.
yeah, the Kurt. I tried getting a house over there too, but there's like nothing available, at least when I was looking, nothing available. But yeah, it was the fucking three strikes rule that really turned
I,
the war zone around. And that whole area up there of the southeast. But in the Trumbull Park area, you had Crips and Bloods living next door to each other, who were just like, yeah, we had to leave L.A.
which
And
is why it
that,
had so much. Okay, that is good
yeah,
perspective, Richard. Thanks.
yeah, and I just posted a flyer from a show that I put on there around that time for a buddy of mine, Scott Reynolds, who sang in the band All. He was in a band called Boxer Rebellion, and I tried putting on like 2 or 3 shows and still owe friends of mine money from doing that shit. But I put on a show for him at Trumbull Community Center, and oh, dude, it was sort of a nightmare in the parking lot. I know Dom was there, but yeah, it was sort of a nightmare in the parking lot with all the gangsters coming around and all the punk rockers out there drinking their beer. And of course, punk rockers feel like they're entitled to everything. And yeah, I was just sitting at the door, fucking taking people's money in, hoping that I made enough money and nobody got killed and shit. And fucking yeah, it was But after that, we didn't have shows down there anymore. But that was when I went to my first show, and that was over in the fairgrounds neighborhood north of the fairgrounds. Forget the name of the place, but the show was Government Issue from D.C. and Willful Neglect from Minnesota. And Government Issue ended up blowing off the show. But after that, the rest of that summer, Gordy, Gordy Anderson, the guitarist guy, the DJ guy, he ended up getting a club down in the North Valley called Test Site Studios. And we had that place for about 5 weeks. Whole shit ton of bands came through there. JFA played there. No Trend, this band from Phoenix called Junior Achievement. Um, and then we lost that place to the landlord. Um, that was just the way things went. And then after that, things sort of went silent for a while. And we'd have like shows here and there. After like 85, 86, it felt like the scene had sort of died. And it was that way all over the country. And that part of the punk rock scene, the hardcore scene, the way Ian MacKaye from Minor Threat puts it, is that by 1986, everyone in the hardcore scene had turned 18. So it was over with because the hardcore scene was seriously a teenage scene. And once everyone turned 18, it was just like, eh. And then, some of the bands started trying to become rock stars and ended up doing a whole bunch of drugs and shit and playing shitty music. But then while that was going on, there was something else going on. And that was the late 80s hardcore scene. And that's where, like, Dave Hernandez ended up becoming a big part of that. Um, and that's when I got in a couple of bands, and we were still just doing like crappy, uh, backyard garage shows and shit. But there's a lot of amazing bands that came through, and a lot of amazing talent that came out of Albuquerque at that time. Um, and Santa Fe. I got to include Santa Fe because there's bands like Grimple and 27 More Minutes, um, Logical Nonsense. They all came out of Santa Fe. And then in Albuquerque, we had the guys who, I don't know if Fractured was around then. What bands those guys were doing back then? I don't remember. They weren't doing Fractured yet. Maybe, yeah, they were doing Fractured. And Dave Hernandez had a band called Monkey Wrench. And that was right before Scared Chaka. Uh, and so during that time, we were just doing hit or miss shows. Like we had shows at the Towers. That's where the No Effects Riot was. And then we tried having shows at the studio where we recorded what was called Dog Shit Records, and it was a 4 band comp with my band, Word Salad, Dom Felch's band. He was playing in Felch at that time. Great name for a band. And the big guys that I was just talking about, Brian Banks and Jesse, they were in Fractured. So there's the dude had a studio there, and that's where we recorded that, and tried to have Green Day play there. That would have been the third time that they played, but the show got shut down. And that was a big thing about having shows here and there and all over the place. So a lot of times they just got shut down. And then it was around that time in the late 80s that Joe ended up getting heavy into the promoter thing. And he was totally self-taught, just started working with a bag of dirt and fucking figured it out on his own. And that's, part of the reason why he's like one of the hardest people to get anything free out of. He just does not do free shit.
Really? A lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people have expressed their gratitude and said how he gave them chances and opportunities that they never would have had.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it was great back in the day. If you can never figure out what the fuck is going on in Joe's head because he had so much shit going on in his head. But like he'd be sitting at the bar, or a friend of you been sitting with you at the bar, and he'd walk past and he'd see either one of you and knew that you were in a band and just come over and be like, "Hey, you want to play with 12 Step Rebels on Friday?" And you're like, "Yeah, okay."
What a good dude.
Yeah, and so yeah, you go upstairs, put you on the bill, and you were on the ticket, you know. And I DJ'd for him a bunch, and he always paid me, and I got paid more than the bands got paid as a DJ. The bands got would always get pissed off about that. Dude, all you're doing is playing records. You get paid $50. We got a four-piece band here, and we get paid $50. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't make the rules. You want me to give you some money? You want me to buy you a drink? Look, kick one of the guys in your band out. Then you only got three guys to pay.
There's always a solution.
But yeah, when Joe took over, and there was also Beyond Ordinary, and then after BO, uh, Launchpad opened.